excuse me, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so you might hear me cough occasionally. But with a lot of the presentations that I build, I really like to modularize them. So that means that depending on the user group and how much time I have, because I've presented anywhere from an hour and a half to 30 minutes. I like to be able to scale it up and down. So we'll get through a lot of demos. We may or may not hit all of them today, but I also have resources available to access some of the other ones as well online if we don't get through everything you see in the session. But this is kind of giving you a broad overview of some of the stuff we'll talk about related to bookmarks, as far as some of the hover effects, being able to do really interesting design processes, using buttons as visualizations, even getting into animations where you can actually add GIFs and other stuff. So many different topics that we'll be covering over the next 45 or 50 minutes. But this is primarily demo driven. I would like to show rather than tell. So I will go ahead and hop out of my PowerPoint and just kind of start walking through some of the things that we can do with buttons as objects in Power BI.
Okay, and while you're getting that set up, do you want people to just interrupt you with a question, or would you rather kind of, wait to a different point?
What I'll do is, I have a chat. I have two monitors, so I have a chat on the other ones. So I think I can't remember. Does Zoom have an option to raise a hand, or is it just like comments and stuff?
I think if they raise their hand, I think there is that kind of option, but I could also monitor the chat, and then at the appropriate time, there is reactions. You can raise hand, and so I'll watch for that and then let you know when.
I just raised my hand, by the way.
Yep. So
okay,
that's how
I don't
it
see
shows.
that in the chat window, but what I'll just say is if you have a question, drop it in the chat. And what I do is I glance over at that occasionally, and as questions come up, I also at the end of every demo leave it open. Like, yeah, I saw hello from Sacramento popped up there. So at the end of each demo, I also have an open opportunity for it. But as questions come up, if there is something that I'm demoing that you have a question on, drop it into there. And if I see it, I'll either answer it, at a breaking point for myself or at the end of the demo. But I can very easily self-monitor, so no big deal that way. All right, let's go ahead and open this up. So yeah, to start with, here's a page with a question at the top, and just the idea of like which of these are buttons. Looking around it, then there's a lot of different things we have onto the page. We have things which are more clearly buttons here, things that you can press and click, very different effects and designs that are built into them. But we also have things that look like cards and KPIs. This one here actually has multiple values that can actually show up, 3 different ones. This one has a built-in spark line. The trick question, obviously, with considering the demo, is that all of these things are various types of buttons that you can configure. Even these little ones that are down here in this little slider, that these are button objects that have been configured with various objects or even imported files to get them to look certain ways. But they can be very versatile and configurable and used for a lot of different processes. And this one, as you can see, is changing colors with the KPI depending on something that's been defined in a measure that is being controlled by a slicer. So they're very, very versatile things and that can be built. So this kind of gives you an example of the art of possible from the beginning, and then we can slowly go through and talk about these, one demo at a time. So, this is at least preloading you to understand some of the possibilities that we can explore together. So at a very fundamental level, the thing that's important to understand with buttons is their hover effects. And from a very simple level, I'll kind of start simple and then talk about more advanced methods and options. But what we have with any of these buttons, if I was to use this one as an example over here and zoom in a little bit, we have a button that has states. They all have 3 primary states that you'll typically configure. A button has a default, hover, and press. And those 3 represent 3 states on the page. What it is when it's not having a mouse hover over it, what happens when the mouse hovers, what happens when the mouse clicks. Kind of like think of it like similar to a website. Like you want the ability to trigger a notification to the user that, hey, oh, something changed. That kind of makes it look like I can click it. So it helps to guide the users and also just to create an effect that helps to remove some of the boringness from a report. Like it's nice to be able to feel like you're tactilely pressing something, versus a button that activates, but it doesn't have any effect. It's the same thing, with why you like to press an elevator button. It feels satisfying to be able to actually feel like you are doing something with it besides just the action that it's triggering. So at a very basic level, one of the things that I've done for years is I've used colors as a way to provide an effect without having to go to 3D or anything else. Like way back in the day, I actually used to do some clever tricks with text size and a few other things with the outlines thickness to kind of make it look like this was physically pressing in, like an actual 3D button. With most of the other design processes in the industry these days, flat and kind of 2D designs are pretty popular and cleaner looking. So after a while, there's a few Microsoft blog posts that came up where they were using colors to achieve this effect. And I really like that. It's subtle, it's clean, but in this case with fill, the only thing that I've done is the default state is a light color. The on hover becomes a little bit darker. So that's how the hover comes. And then just the press is the deepest one. And recently what they, or I should say what we do to achieve a certain effect with these is when you design this, you can actually have two versions of the button. There's an inactive one and there's an active one, which is like essentially what's been toggled. Now I'll give you an example of what these look like when you actually have a page. Let me pull up my other report here. Just 1 sec. Not that one, because I want to give you an example of how this is implemented with the two buttons. Because I would love an ability, and the thing that you need two buttons for is today there is no state that says is the bookmark that's attached to this has it been activated. Because of that, you actually need two buttons sitting on top of each other with a hover and hide effect that I'll show you here in just a minute once I open up this other file. But to kind of have an active and inactive effect toggling between the two of them, you basically need two cloned versions of the same button that get toggled. So let me pop up. Here we go. And this one was actually supposed to be open. So I will pop up this report and you'll kind of see what I mean. I always say today with anything. I like to be vague. Did I say today there's no bookmark 6? I can either deny or confirm, but there is nothing today. I'm saying that more because it's a wishful thinking. I would love it. I've also given multiple times feedback to Microsoft, like right now, there needs to be a configuration where if the assigned bookmark has been toggled, because Microsoft knows what bookmark is active, I want to be able to configure the fill, the outline. I want to be able to just separately configure every state when this button has a bookmark that's been activated. So like that, I think they've gotten a lot of feedback on that, and maybe it might come out someday, but I think they are very aware that that is a very desired feature. Yeah, exactly. So like, and that would save me from needing two versions of this. But the report that's now open that I can show is, as an example, like if I was to do page navigation in this one, which I'll demo in a second, we have like an activated, which there's no click effect, there's no hover effect. It is very clear that this cannot be interacted with this because that's the page that I'm on. Separately, I have a button that has a hover and a click effect. But if I go to this page, I have flipped it from the inactive button to the inactive button. So there is separate versions of this button for page 2. There are two versions of the button for page 3. That as I switch between the pages, I toggle between them. I'm not going to go through the process of setting up the bookmarks because this is more about configuring the buttons themselves, but you can see the need for kind of an active and inactive, because rather than needing the text to display somewhere on the page, hey, this button is active, the button itself through its configuration is telling you this has been activated, these can be clicked. So it's, active page or active button, inactive buttons that can be toggled. So someday, maybe you don't have to do the two versions, but that's been something we've needed to do for years. And that's why we have these two versions of it. So you basically have one where you create the states, and then the other one, you mirror the states to each other. So it does not look like you can interact with it at all because it's already been activated in some sense. So that's at the basic level. We have the color. So now we can start talking about a little bit more advanced button configuration. This is something that just came out last month. There are a ton of new button configurations now. I haven't even explored all of them yet, but we actually have a couple. We have shape shadow, shape glow, rotation. All of these are new. So like these just came out with a recent release. So I'm actually excited to see what people are going to blog about with all of these different things to create really cool new button effects. Because you can actually, not the rotation, I believe, yeah, the shape has the states, the shadow. So those can also be configured per default, hover, and click. So the art of possible has been drastically multiplied for additional configurations. But the thing that I want to call out specifically on this is you might notice that there is a custom icon in here, and it even actually toggles between black and white and color. So this is actually an SVG image I downloaded from a website. Now, one thing that's beneficial about SVGs is kind of two parts. One, they are very small files because they're not saving the pixels, they're saving the mapping of where the colors, where the pixels go. So they're very light files that are easy to import. And two, the nice thing about SVGs is that at any size, was to just make that bigger, crisp, sharp, and clean, because it renders at the size that you present it. So it will never get blurry or pixelated. So SVGs are really, really nice to use. And I imported these from a website that just has a bunch of images. The one that I use is Flat Icon. It has a whole series of them, but I downloaded a version of these that allows you to, basically have a black and white version and a colored version. So that's where I got this. But if you look over here in the icon section, we used to historically only have these. You could show no icon, or you could show the bookmark. They added, with all those other features, an option for custom. And if I was to click custom, oh yeah, and let me go ahead and just delete. There we go, add image. Let me navigate quickly to the folder, and then I'll put that onto the page, and I'll show you the types of icons that you can import. Here we go. All right, so as you can see, there's a lot of different images that it accepts, a lot. Like almost every type of image you can possibly think of, it will accept as an image type. But the important one is that it, right there, SVG. So it will accept SVG images, and I have a bunch of those that I downloaded for various different implementations, but I can bring those right into here and use those as a custom icon. So any possible icon I want, I can import. I will say as a note, because it's an icon, it expects the image to be square. So when you are importing these, like if it's not square, it's going to have a hard time fitting in that space. So it doesn't matter the resolution of the size or even what image type it is, but it should be a square shape as the image file, whatever that file type might be. But now I have the freedom to basically add any possible type of icon. Let me save that one more time. There we go. And actually, just in case, I'm going to save a copy of this to desktop so I don't overwrite my original. Okay. Yeah, I have reported a small bit of feedback to Microsoft. Notice that there's a couple of little faint lines that are showing up. This should not actually be happening right here because this SVG does not have any borders. So it's doing there's basically a glitch in the rendering. But because this is a 1 month release, just came out a little more than a month ago, they're still tweaking it. So that's something that should go away. But at least at the moment, I have noticed a very, very small little formatting glitch that pops up. Even if your file doesn't have borders, it sometimes adds them into there. But that should be going away once they do some updates after getting the feedback. But it's really nice that they just were able to unlock the art of possible for this. A couple of other things to note just as far as the design goes. So with the icon, you do have a couple of options for placement. I've found personally that left of the text makes it pretty small, and just the look and aesthetic is not really what I was going for. I've personally found a way to do custom, which all that does is it actually does kind of like in Word, where you have word wrap and you can choose in front, next to, behind, or through. They don't interact with each other. This text and this shape actually are both basically stacking on top of each other. The way I got the text to move and have it that big is I actually just simply adjusted the margin padding. If I had this at 4, that's actually what would be happening. So I found that the best formatting for this to have a larger icon, but also the text to be to the right of it, is just simply figuring out the number of pixels that I wanted. The other benefit too is that if you do it to the left, I cannot control how much spacing is here. It's going to be the icon and the text will touch. There's no way for me to add padding between the icon and the text if I do to the left of the text as the icon settings. So this at least gives me an additional control where I can move this over and provide even more spacing. But that's the nice thing with buttons. They're so highly configurable. You can do horizontal and vertical alignment. You have control over all of the margins on every side. So you can thoroughly tweak it until it's the exact look and format that you're wanting when it comes to the design of that. excuse me, I am going to show the buttons over here on the left, but at least from a perspective of the two features that I've shown so far with, thank you, Kevin, for the link, for the colors or the custom icons. Are there any questions yet? All right, let me pop that up in just a second. Oop. There you go. So last one that I want to show is one that's down here. I actually came across this a little begrudgingly, but I made a video with Love recently. I don't know if any of you watch the YouTube channel How to Power BI. Boz does some ridiculously well-produced videos and pop-out effects and all sorts of stuff that I'm fairly confident he just has a production company that does it for him. But he recently did a video on button effects, like this button effect, in fact. But the thing that like hurt me a little bit is more of just because it was not a best practice, is he had to make it with 3 separate objects. He actually added a background shape. He added a separate shape for the line and then a third shape for the button. So he had 3 separate unique objects on his selection pane to be able to make this, rather than in this case. There we go. As you can see, I just have one button with a custom icon that does all of that. But he had a total of, it would be the equivalent of 3 per button. So you have 5 buttons, you would have had 15 objects. And as a bit of background, performance goes down the more objects you have on the page. It doesn't matter if you have the fastest model in the world and you have 1 row in your fact table. Websites are single threaded, so when they load, they have to load visuals concurrently, one after the other. And if you have a ton of extra objects on your page, it slows your report down, and you might end up with a report page that when you open it, it takes 5 to 10 seconds to load. So the goal with any report design is you always want to use 1 object. So I saw the video and I was inspired by like, oh, this is actually a cool effect. I like the idea of a button where you hover, a bar appears and it moves over, and then you click it, and then that's the active state. So the achieved effect essentially is this that he was showing. Here's my other report page so you can see it in action. Here we go. So it would look like this. You have the page navigation, there's your active page. You can click on that. That becomes your active page. So like that was the achieved effect. But here, there would have been 9 objects onto that. And like I immediately thought, wait, we have custom icons. Why can't we build this? So kind of with the idea over here, where what it actually is the button placement. Yeah, once I'm done with this, I will link you to the YouTube video that I have that talks about this, and it also links to his original one. The text placement is changed because the actual button itself, it is square. It looks like a bar. The actual button that I added as an SVG is this shape. The fact that I did is I built this in PowerPoint, and I actually exported an SVG from it. In my PowerPoint file, you'll see in a second, I have a bar object, and then I have a clear object behind it that is a square. So like that actually is a full square image being imported, but what I do is I just have the text basically overlaying most of it. So the achieved effect is this nice little pop out that we're getting, but it looks like a CSS button that you'd see like in on a standard web page. So it's a very unique effect that I like, but I was able to reproduce in a single action. So let me kind of show you some of the configurations. I'll actually move this over here so I can zoom in a bit. But the icon, the default state has no icon. The hover has a custom one. So it's basically my vertical line light that I built out. Yep, I have that in my in the video that I'll link to in a bit. So that's the hover one here. And that has the light one and then the on press.
Well, forever. Using
Somebody needs to be muted. Oh, there we go. Okay. And then the click one is the actual active button effect. So I built this again in PowerPoint, but the thing that I wanted to mention here, just as the last little bit of information, is the text. Notice the left margin for the text for default. That's why it's sitting here. But when I hover, it scoots over, right? I'm able to do that because I've increased my margin for on hover and on press. So that's how the text shifts with the bar that's into there. It's still overlapping technically the entire object, but 80% of that square SVG that I imported is just completely transparent. So let me show you the PowerPoint document that I built this with. It was very easy to do, and I've actually been happy the amount of photoshopping I can do in PowerPoint, because as a YouTuber, if I'm releasing these, I really like to be able to provide a file that can be opened in a tool that 99% of viewers will have. Most people don't have Photoshop. most people have PowerPoint, and it can export SVGs, which I was super happy about. So here's the objects that I have brought in, the SVGs. If I click on them, notice it's a square shape. So technically, here's what I actually have. I have two objects that have been grouped together. I have my my bar, that's just a standard insert object, it's a shape. And then I added a square, and then I grouped them. And the beauty of this is, now that you've actually seen what the shape looks like with a line, if I click this, I can right click, I can save as a picture. And as long as you are using native shapes that are in PowerPoint, you're not actually doing any images or anything else. It's just shapes and icons that are built in, because this will not work if you actually added a custom image or photo into here. You can come down and you can choose SVG as an output. So it can save this file as an SVG. It converts it, which gives you that file that can render at any size, and it gives you a file that is very light and that can be imported. So it took me maybe 5 minutes to quickly throw these together. I saved them, and then it was just a matter of coming in and importing it into here and configuring the padding and everything else to get these to pop up. So it was again, like I was inspired by another video, but like my first thought is just, all right, this is great, but we can make it better with less objects, and we can build this in just using native SVGs. So it's always nice to be inspired by other people, for sure. But this gives you kind of an understanding of both. You can use icons you can download online, but if you wanted to, you can build a lot of custom shapes pretty easily, even as SVGs in PowerPoint. Like, I've told a lot of people that, for quick and dirty Photoshopping, PowerPoint's actually a surprisingly decent photo creator in that sense, because it has a lot of tools built in. I've seen it work on mobile when I've tested this on publishing this and testing it on the app on my phone. So you're welcome to test it out yourself, but I've not seen any issues as long as it renders appropriately in Power BI. In general, though, what I will say is on mobile, most of the time you do not, when you configure the mobile layout, which would be like this, you typically do not add the buttons onto the page. What people will usually do is they'll have a bookmarks pane that they'll click the bookmark somewhere from over here, rather than like, having the button somewhere on the page itself. But when I've built this out and reconfigured the sizes a little bit, I've still been able to get them to render appropriately. You just have to change a few settings. Where do I go back to this one? But yeah, let me quickly grab the link, and if there's any questions on this so far, you're welcome to either type it into the chat or bring it up, and I'm just gonna pull up the YouTube link for y'all.
So I didn't actually get what you were saying about the bookmark pane, but that's not really part of this. But if there's time at the end and you want to get into it, that could be helpful. Sure,
I'm just saying, like, so just like the bookmark pane can be accessed here in desktop, you can also have the ability in the mobile app. There's a way to go and access the bookmarks pane from there. So you just see a list of the bookmarks to be able to activate rather than necessarily buttons, because you're very limited on what you can put in the mobile layout. So most of the time you wouldn't necessarily want to fill it up with buttons, just the visuals. And then if they want, they just open the bookmark pane, activate the bookmark, and then close it.
I see. I did not know that there was the bookmarks pane in mobile. That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, it should be somewhere in the settings, similar to like the options to access the drill through, see the filters and everything else. But they usually provide it as a pop-up rather than a something built into the page. And here's the link to the video. So that's my video, and then in the description there is there's a link as well to to Boz's video. So grab that, and then I'll do the next demo. To Power BI, there it is. Yeah, I wish I had the money to spend on a production company like he does. I'm also pretty close with Adam Saxton, and we talk a lot about YouTube. And similarly, like he actually pays a company to produce his videos. So he records them, but then they do all the fancy cool effects and that. But after asking like, oh, how much is that? Oh yeah, I really don't want to spend that much money on my YouTube videos. Not at least until I have 200,000 subscribers like he does, actually can make enough off of ad revenue to afford it. But they look really cool though, and I'm always very impressed with other channels that have like these ridiculous budgets for a lot of those effects. Here's the other video. Okay, me go ahead and move on to the next one then. So another one that I want to show is this little toggle button. Another really cool way to highly configure a native button. I didn't actually use any custom objects in this. This is all done with native button features in Power BI. So here's an example of like a use case for it. A client actually wanted this. It's like a sliding toggle between two things to be able to toggle, between A and B, just like two separate settings. It was for actually a page to toggle between page 1 and 2. But in this case, like I'm toggling between two different charts. But the achieved effect is, there's a slider on the right. I can slide it to the left and slide it back to the right. So let me actually zoom in a bit, copy this one, and walk you through the settings that were configured for this. And they're now in, that's right, okay. So they used to be in the outline section, but for those of you who are all familiar with buttons historically, before we had dedicated shapes, outline was where you actually came to add the rounded edges. Now you have that available in the shape section where you can turn the rounded edges on. So this, to start with, that's how I'm able to get kind of the pill effect, is you knock the edges up from 0 to, in this case, I did about 20. It gives a nice rounded effect in there. The magic really comes from the slider that's in the middle, but I basically go with 3 colors. I start with one color in the middle or on the right, go to a neutral color in the middle, in this case gray, just have another color assigned to the left, but it creates kind of a sliding effect with all 3 states, and almost looks like it's animating between them when the user will click it. But I would say the fun part of this really comes from the text. So I'm actually able to add an emoji in here. This is not standard text, but with Windows, if you do the Windows key and either semicolon or period, it pops up an emoji keyboard. It's one of my favorite hidden gems of Windows 10 and later. I was introduced to it like 3 years ago, and it was one of those like blew my mind, like, wait, this exists? I used to have to Google emoji and copy paste it from a website. I didn't know it was built into Windows, but you type in something like circle, I get a list of things that are circle related. And in this case, there's a really nice little white circle. It actually has a nice little outline with it that gives it a nice added effect. I could have gone from just a black dot, like a something for bullets or things like that, but it would have been solid black. This has just a bit more design that I think just makes it stand out well with the two-tone. There's a couple considerations for this though. Because it is a rich emoji that actually has an assigned color, each operating system that renders this has their own library for emojis. They will usually have a fairly common shared library between each other. So there's always going to be the what do they call this one? Like grinning face with sweat. Every emoji library has a grinning face with sweat face that comes with it. That will render on Windows, Mac, Apple, Android, etc. But the look and aesthetic of it will be a little bit different because Windows does more of the flat ones with the thick border. Apple has a bit more of a shading and kind of shadow that goes with it. Android looks a little bit different. So depending on how precise you are trying to get these, as far as the look and design goes, it's important to consider what device this is being consumed on, as far as the end users who are looking at this report, because that circle might look a little bit different. Maybe it's a slight different size if it's running on another operating system with a different library for that exact shape. So that's the only small consideration to have, is just be conscious of the device that people are going to access this on. But otherwise, excuse me, I've seen it work very well, published to web and everything else, and any browser that I've seen renders it appropriately, because again, it's not using the browser library, it's using the library of the OS that you are residing on. But with that, I was able to add the emojis, it always messes up there. There you go, the emoji symbol that was in here. And basically the formatting trick is my default state. I have that set to a right alignment. My on hover is set to the middle. And the on press, that is set over to the left. So that's how I'm able to get middle, right, and left, and basically created a little slider toggle that kind of had the achieved effect of the toggle switch that I wanted to create for the client. But I was very happy I was able to do this with the full just out of the box features, really, outside of the emoji, which is the one little nuance thing. I mean, I could have come into here and I think Phil, yeah, I could have created 3 of these images in PowerPoint, and I could have added 3 custom SVG images or something with this effect as well if I wanted to. But that requires me creating those 3 in Photoshop or in PowerPoint, and then I also have to import them. So it adds a little complexity just to have to add custom files into here. So my default generally is native as possible, like trying to create this feature just using built-in features, and then starting to resort to custom stuff if I absolutely have to due to limitations or considerations of the software itself. But I think it gives you just a good example of like how unique buttons can look. It doesn't have to have text. It doesn't have to, just be something with a word that you can press. Like it can be very unique little slider toggles that are in there. Any questions on this one? Oh, and I actually need to make sure my chat window is up. There we go. Okay. If not, then let me take a drink here and we can do the next demo. Remind me, so we started at 3:45. Approximately what time would you like to wrap up the presentation, just so I can be mindful of the time?
You've got at least another half an hour.
Perfect. So I'll consider about 5 o'clock then. Right around there. Okay. That way I don't go too far over anything. All right. So what I want to do now is talk about how to use buttons as visualization. We have a couple of different options here. To start with, I want to talk about this one at the top. So with a lot of my inspiration, it's very commonly occurring with clients who provide me usually a mock-up or something where they're like, hey, I've seen this in Tableau, can you make this? Or we used to do something in .NET, can you build this for us? And I like those because it's like, well, I've not ever thought of building that, but let's figure out, given the tools that I have, some way to configure this. So that's what I ended up resulting in. Now I started with something here where it looks and smells like a card. It has a way for it to dynamically change. I have a considered a primary, secondary value, and a KPI indicator. A number, some type of a comparison that I'm doing. The information isn't as important as just the fact that I've printed out some text with some values, and if it's below the plan, red; above the plan, green. But they wanted like a KPI bar to just give them a little a quick status via color and access to that. Now, my first iteration of this, I was to let me move this over. There we go, and grab this. There we go. Okay. Ungroup it. All right. It was 1, 2. I had 3 different objects that I actually used to build this out. The first one here, as you can potentially imagine, I used, that's interesting. I used a single value card. The thing that I used here in the middle was a button to actually, I had a very just basically thin button that I used to create the KPI there, and I overlaid on another single value card on the bottom of that. But the consideration with this, as you can imagine, after discussing kind of the button hover effects and multiple objects, is the more objects you have on the page, the slower it's going to take. One object loading all 3 of these measures will take substantially less time to load than 3 objects. Doesn't matter what the object is. It just, there's a certain amount of processing, and you can even observe this. If I was to come up with the performance analyzer, let's just start recording. Refresh the visuals. So any of these things here, completed value, you can actually see that the DAX query sometimes in these it's like nothing, but just the fact to load it, the loading the visual onto the page can be the majority of the time taken for this. So the more you have of these, as you can see, the milliseconds can add up real quick when you start getting into 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds on a page that has a lot of these cards. So like, all right, I built this. It looks like what I want to, but 3 objects per card, and I have like 10 cards on the page. What can I do to consolidate these and maybe do this in a single visual? So in this case, I've actually figured out a way to do this with 2 objects. Move this over here. Let's see. Okay, I think they muted themselves. And I'm going to copy this out. There we go. Okay, perfect. Ungroup. I actually just have 2 objects in this case. So I have at the bottom a single value card the standard script at the bottom. And again, the DAX measure that's in here isn't as important. It's just, you know, a concatenation of a couple values and a couple of symbols in there. But the thing that really is the trick in this is that this is a button. Notice that the button title, by the way, is 1202. However, that's not fixed. If I click this, this changes. The title changes too. So I still have a similar process. My fill for the button is using a measure, because with a lot of these, anytime you see this f of x symbol, I don't have to have a fixed color. I can instead use the measure to tell it what color to turn. The measure in here itself isn't particularly complex. If I was to open it up and show you the measure for this, it's completed KPI colors. So let's take a look at that. Brilliant. Pretty straightforward. I have a hex code declared as green, hex code declared as red. Basically, hey, if this measure greater than or equal to 0, return green, otherwise just return red. So basic calculation that just in this measure, it returns one of 2 hex code colors. Because I'm able to supply the conditional formatting in here for the fill to those, it turns either red or green, with this sitting on top of it to kind of create that little bar that needs to pop up and present one of those 2 colors to it. So that's the actual button itself in the body of that. But what I've also done to get rid of that single value card at the top, excuse me, the title. That just doesn't have to be a fixed title. That can also harvest a measure to have a dynamic value into there. So that's what I had done previously. So this is also a measure that is returning a number. It actually is formatted as text. So let me show you the, I think it's this one. Nope. Here it is. Yep. So all I've done is I have a measure that formats completed amount, and then I choose how to format it. What the format function does is it converts it from numbers to text. So it looks like a number, smells like a number, but it is actually a text output. And I'm allowed to supply a title with anything that is a text data type. You'll even see in here what it allows me to select or not. Like I can select this one, I can select that one, but I can't select these other ones because they're not text. So it recognizes what the output is, and it will let me select measures that are outputting any text data type. So that's how I'm able to take the top and actually combine 2 visuals into one, because the title basically becomes the card, and then the bottom, because that becomes that little bar that I'm trying to create between them. So now I've gone from 3 visuals to 2 visuals, and part of it is you'll want to make sure that, here we go, that's in front of it. Yeah, so they stack well, and then group the 2 together, and that becomes like the custom card that the client would want. And can even turn off snap to grid, scoot you down. There you go, just a little bit to make it slightly bigger. But the achieved effect allows me to, make a custom visual with 2 objects. The one potential further optimization is I could also maybe use Charticulator or Dena. There's a few tools out there that let you build custom visuals from scratch, and I could potentially make one of those into there. But the performance consideration of this is low enough that, given the extra time, where I could probably build this a little bit quicker than necessarily building the custom visual, but it allows me to use out of the box native features, and it's giving me an option to actually have a very creative use of a button. Like there's no action assigned to it. It doesn't click, it doesn't perform anything. I'm really just using this to achieve the kind of the bar effect. And some of you also who are familiar with Power BI might think that, like, well, technically, if I wanted to, I could also do that with the text box. I could have, in theory, if I move this over here, I could have a title onto the text box and maybe change the background and a few other stuff. But the annoying part that I find with text boxes is this always pops up. It gets in the way of stuff. I can never disable this little pop-up window. So at least as a developer working with buttons as a empty object to throw colors and other stuff into, kind of as a visual, I just prefer to work with buttons because it's just, for a developer, it has less pop-up annoyances. And again, there's just so many other things that you can do with it. So it's a really, really configurable object for buttons and otherwise, just because there's so many different settings that you can apply to this. So it has a lot of cool art of possible solutions for it. Excuse me. Are there any questions on this one that I can cover before I do the next demo? If not, I'll take another drink here and then we will do the next demonstration. Okay. Go back to this. Another cool example of why buttons can make great cards, single value cards. We actually can do a fun effect where we have a button comes up. We have one body of text or one number, but if you hover over it, maybe I want to show the variance. Now, in this case, I have, let's just assume it's against the plan or against the forecast. It's minus 604, which is the raw number, minus 5%. And if I click on it, there's the goal that it's being compared to. So 11,000 being compared to a goal of 12,000. But now I have one visual that shows me every possible cut of that data. Granted, I could also maybe do this with a tooltip if I wanted to do a report tooltip with like a native single value card. But I really like the hover and click effect just to have it onto the page there. So it gives you 2 to 3 different cuts of your data to print anything that you want in a single card. So it allows you to unclutter it. You don't have to concatenate it all together, but then you get a lot of really cool effects that go with it this way. So I think it's a really cool way to add additional information without having to create a lot of extra noise on the report, where it's accessible via the user interactions via the mouse. Excuse me. So come over here. And even the fact that I also have the background changing with the color depending on what's being selected, again, whether or not the variance is above or below. So you have a lot of unique cases to turn them into very KPI rich visuals themselves. But the card, as you can imagine, the text, which normally would have like click me or something else, I just have 3 measures that have had values that have been formatted to convert to text. And each one of those is in the different wells. My default state, that is completed amount. And then my on hover, same thing, it's a different measure. There's my completed amount variance and my, I think it's a goal that I call this one. Yeah, the open goal, or should be actually completed goal, but we have 3 different values that are being returned into there. So like the states really allow for so much customization with those, but I think it can really help to give you a lot of ideas of different ways to use this and to honestly make a better card than the card visual has in the first place. Another huge benefit is very annoyingly, the single value card, if I'm just gonna throw a number into here. It's something that I got added when Power BI was invented. It's never been updated. Like there has never been a new feature added for this, but we don't really have any options to configure the data label that much. Like I can't choose alignment. I can't choose the amount of padding for my category. Like I would love to be able to scoot this up if I wanted to make this smaller, but the problem is, I start to move this up, it's immediately cutting it off. Like I have so much extra room. Like I would love to be able to scoot this up. I would love to be able to scoot this up. I can't control, any of the spacing in here. So the cards are honestly very large and not particularly configurable for me. So it's one of the reasons that I don't use them a lot. With the button, well, look at that. Like I have an option to choose my alignment in here. I can choose where it sits on the top, bottom, or middle. I can choose the left or the right. I can choose how much padding that I want to put into here and where I want to scoot it. So I can pixel perfect get this to sit exactly where I need it onto the card itself. So they really do make a better card than the card is. And it's funny is like all these settings are available for a button. It wouldn't be that easy, wouldn't be that hard, I don't think, I'm guessing, to port this to the single value card. Just these settings, vertical, horizontal, and margins. Like add that to the single value card. But until they do that, I've many times actually utilized a button to help allow me to, make something really, really small, where I can make the card a lot more narrow. I can get this to configure in a smaller setting depending on what I'm trying to build. So I can compact it to make more room on a report page when it comes to that. So many ways, like I'm fortunate for the button as a really good quality custom visual in that sense. But I think this gives you just a different cut of some of the other features that I've already talked about in terms of the states and everything. But I think it gives you one more order possible for really being able to use the button to provide a three value KPI card in a single object. Any questions on this one?
Hey, Reid, it's Michelle. How do you train your users to realize that that's an option?
Sure. Depending on if it's a lot of new users coming in, I might have a little like information icon in the upper right. There's one thing that I've actually found really useful is I've done report tooltips in the visual header. So let's see if I can give you an example. Not that. I'll actually add GIFs where people can watch it. So if I do a table, let's just throw some random data in here. Here we go. So this visual header has an option for a visual header tooltip. This thing, little symbol here, you can actually add, you can connect that to a report page. So I've actually built blank report pages. And what you can do is you can actually come into here. You can add an image to the page background, and that image can be a GIF. So I've actually created a little, like, I've recorded in Camtasia or something, I've recorded little animations that show like maybe how to use something in the report. I add it to the tooltip page, and then, was it here? Yep. And then when they hover over this, the report page pops up, and it's basically a tiny window that's playing a looping animation of like something on the page that they're supposed to do. So I've often created little breadcrumb trails for people. I was inspired by Matt Allington. He did a post on this using the visual header, a report tooltip page, and a GIF as the background is a great way to have little mini, soundless tutorials that just shows like the mouse clicking here and here to to do some achieved effect on how to use the tool or the product.
That's awesome. Thank you. And
Yeah,
someone had a
absolutely.
question, is there a rotation feature for buttons?
Yes, that was added recently. So it's not by state, unfortunately. So they do have a rotation. I think the shape. Yeah. So if the shape's on, let's see, because what I have is I believe my background's on. So the shape default. Let's see. I'm trying to actually get the shape to load. So let me get a new one. Here we go. All right. Blank. Now the rotation should look a little bit different. 25. There we go. Okay. So you can see like I'm rotating the whole thing, the shape. The text can also be rotated if I add text into there. So there you go. So like it has multiple ways to rotate that. It's reliant on the outline and the fill related to the shape itself. But as you can see, like this, the frame does not rotate, but the object inside of it does. So by the time you publish it, the shape will still have the effect that you need, and the click will actually be within the outline. Like if you clicked on the outside here, that would not trigger the action for your button. It would only be inside of whatever the shape outline was. So you can do a lot of ways to angle and rotate now with these 4 settings related to all of the shape features, including even like close and shadows and everything else, plus the rotation.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right. I'd say one other thing that I'll talk about and probably wrap up here. Let me actually, yeah, I'll wrap up with the magic button section. So that was another thing that I had a little bit of fun with. And I also built all of these GIFs in PowerPoint. So a couple button effects that we have here. There's one at the top. Hover over it, you get this little scrolling marquee effect. Similar, we have a little click option on it there, but I just had some fun figuring out ways to create some really interesting buttons. The ones that I actually would use in a production thing are the sheens, because part of this is I wanted to figure out a way to, without having to hover on it, to kind of hint, hey, you can click this. So I wanted to create some kind of just looping animation where there's this, in this case, think of it like a light sheen, somebody moving a light over it. But I saw a few of those when I Googled like button effects for websites, and that was the one that I took inspiration from. I have 2 standard ones at the top, and then the bottom one actually wipes back and forth with like a color change. But all of these were, like I said, just built straight in PowerPoint. So let me open this up to show you actually how I made these. 1 second. Presentations. Animated buttons. Here we are. Yeah, so all made out of PowerPoint objects. Like the back and forth one here, if I was to animate this, it goes back, counts at 4 seconds, and then it comes back. So I'm basically just a pretty standard tracking. If you've ever worked with PowerPoint before, here's what I have in it here. It wipes across. It has a 4-second delay in the middle, and then it has another path that it does. So it basically pauses each time. And to get it to also appropriately wait after the last animation before it restarts, because with a GIF, the important part is you don't want it to be obvious when the loop resets. You don't want it to glitch back to the start. You want it to seem like this nice, clean, seamless action. So I basically have a total of 6 up to 12 seconds that is repeating in here. And at the very end of it, you can actually come up to recording. There's an option to export to video, and it doesn't have to be a video. It can be an animated GIF. So whatever the original seconds are, let's assume there's 12 seconds total on the clock that slide takes. If I add another 6 seconds, so if I make that 18, that also leaves a pause of 6 seconds at the end. So now it perfectly loops back. It slides, wait 6 seconds, slides back, wait 6 seconds, slides forward. So it essentially has now triggered this perfect little loop because I've given it the appropriate amount of delay at the end of that animation before it restarts. And I can choose a size that I want to create that GIF, and I click it, it exports it to desktop, and I'm able to add that into that. So it's the same thing with this one. Is I just have 2 objects onto the page that wipe across with each other. As you can see, just the rectangle that moves across with the the shiny bar, as I would call it, just moves across there. There's that delay, that I built into the animation, and it slides back when you're done. And then, as long as I have that necessary pause at the end, it rinses and repeats. I've done that with 2 of them where I changed the speed of the animation. So that's how I'm able to get kind of like the 2 little sheens that move there and back. But honestly, I spent some time just looking at some CSS effects online. And I'm like, all right, how do I do this in PowerPoint? The fun ones I honestly enjoyed were the little animated hovers at the end. Again, because you have to have a perfect loop, I made sure that my tracking animation, my animation has to stop exactly back on the line. So because it ends right on top of each other again, the bar basically just endlessly animates, forever to the right, because when it will loop, let's see. There we go. So, when this stops, it basically, the last frame of the end of the GIF becomes the first frame of the next one, and it doesn't glitch or anything else. I would have a glitch if I was to animate it where the stopping point was up or anywhere else. So it really, that the key to the magic in a GIF is just to make sure that your end frame will transition perfectly into your starting frame each time. Kind of the same thing with this. I just made sure that the pattern moved down and all the teardrops or the raindrops stopped on each other for the most part as best I could. I click that there. Yeah, it's not exactly perfect because I realized the pattern wasn't 100% consistent, but it was really close. So it's still kind of hard to kind of notice where that glitch happens, but you can kind of see it just a teeny tiny bit if you pay attention into there. But my achieved effect really was the business scenario where a client wanted some way to point to people who are using the report for the first time, because they were having a report that was used by a lot of people on a new basis. They weren't repeat customers. They were many new people on a public website. So we animated a button for them. So it kind of was like, hey, you can click me, and then they can finally come over and they can actually click the button and everything in that regard. But yeah, the actual option to add these is really just, as I mentioned before, you have an option to come in, you can add a fill effect, and from there I can add a button into here, whether or not it's a PNG or a GIF. And because these objects are, they are stretched, I did actually incorporate, there we go. I'm fitting it. So normal, it wouldn't necessarily fit onto the entire screen, but the fit means that it's actually taking a 16:9 slide and stretching it. But because these are just bars, you'll never know that it's stretched because it's not something precise. You can kind of tell a little bit with the raindrops that they've been stretched out, but as long as you are doing something pretty non-detailed, it's really hard to tell if you're stretching the image around because people don't know what it's supposed to look like originally. So that's actually why I have approximately a 16:9 button at the bottom, because that's something that you would very obviously know if you were to stretch that out versus the other buttons. But that gives you just one more scenario of a way to do some cool effects with buttons. With that though, I'll wrap up, I think, the demonstration part and leave it open for more questions. And I'll actually have some slides to put up. But before I do that, are there any questions on excuse me, the animated buttons that I just showed.
Where did you get the little wizard?
That is an emoji. Also text. So pop up the keyboard. It's this little guy. Yeah,
That's great.
he's what I usually use in my posts and everything, because my avatar is like the Viz Wiz.
It's a good thing they
Yeah.
added one just for you.
Right? Yeah, I was very happy that he existed. He's also blue, which is the color of the my wizard as well, and my company colors. So I was appreciative that it worked very well. I'll throw up a couple of links here for all of you. So QR code, if you need it, takes you to my company website. There's also links here that I'll copy and paste these into the chat here in just a second. But it's a few links to both presentation PDF and also just a link to all the other talks and presentations that I've given. A couple of links as well to the types of services that I provide, both as a consultant. I do have a course I released earlier this year on designing impactful reports in Power BI. A pretty cool end-to-end course that covers a lot of stuff related to the art of possible in terms of understanding what features are available when building my report, both aesthetically, but also understanding the differences between bookmarks and drill through, slicers versus the bookmarks pane, everything that's needed to configure to make sure you have a report that interacts in a way that makes sense for the user to to drill through and navigate their data. Also, with anything that I have on my site, as a thank you for people, I have a 30% off code that is valid for a month. So if you do find that there's any curiosities or something you might be interested in, that code will work for you as well. I encourage you, if you like this content, it's helpful to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It helps with the growth and exposure and everything. And like, honestly, most of my clients come through that. So plus there's content that I release every week. I do live streams with a lot of people in the industry and lots of cool stuff related to that. So please consider that as well. And if you ever have a question about Power BI, I'm happy to answer it. Just send me a ping on LinkedIn, and I really helping out with the community in general. I'll keep that up, and I'm also just going to copy that here, so that way I can paste it into the chat. There we go. And there's the links there as well. But yeah, any other questions?
I think this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'll kind of reiterate his YouTube channel. I know I look at it a whole lot. Try to connect to the live streams when you can. If you haven't done live streams on YouTube, there's a lot of people doing them now. And they're really, really good about getting into the chat and getting questions answered. And Reid does a great job with his. So
yeah, and they're interactive. I mean, like you can't come off mute or anything, but with the guests that I have, there's a live chat feed on the right. So you ask a question, and we talk about it on the stream. So it very much it's a chance to like hang out with myself and the guest and whatever he's presenting, and just have a conversation. So
yeah, they're always great. Well, again, thank you so much. Last call. Any questions for Reid? Not just seeing thank yous in the chat right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So Reid, I will say that it's nice. Reid on YouTube, you could slow him down. You could run him at like 3/4 speed.
Yes.
Live Reid, not so much.
Well, yeah, exactly. I occasionally have people who actually like say that almost like as a complaint, like, I can't understand, you need to slow down. Like, there's this like, I'm always very polite, but it's like, oh, that's great feedback. If you're not aware, the gear icon has an option to slow the video down in the lower right.
Or if you're trying to follow along and do it, pause, do that part of the
exactly.
exercise and start again.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I think it's both a blessing and a curse, but I'm a very enthusiastic and energetic person, but certainly I know especially for ESL, for people in other countries, that it's sometimes hard to follow. So like I don't mind too much when I'm in the US, but I've come to actually learn to mentally kind of pace myself when I'm overseas, just to make sure that I don't lose a bunch of people in the audience.
It's good advice. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.